Hi, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and I thank you for joining us for a really, really important conversation Black women in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about the offices or the C suites. No, I'm talking about every space and industry and job that Black women find themselves in, along with the ones that they often don't. In a time when we've seen women leave their jobs in droves in order to care for kids who've been kept home during the pandemic, there's maybe no better moment to get into the challenges that women, Black women in particular, are facing. Because there are also active efforts to address some of these challenges, and even where there aren't, there are certainly opportunities for us to step up to the plate and share what we think needs to be done. These are the kinds of discussions that I wanted to make sure were part of congressional thinking when I founded the Caucus on Black Women and Girls with my friends Congresswoman Robin Kelly and Yvette Clarke. While they can't join us today, it has been and continues to be my honor to work alongside them on things like this. So let me take a moment to introduce to you the incredible women who are sharing with us today on our panel. We have with us Jocelyn Frye. She was a senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, whose work focuses on a wide range of women's issues, including work-family balance, pay equity, and women's leadership. We have Amy Bang. She is the Senior Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at Union Pacific Railroad. And in this role, she works to develop, implement, and support strategies focused on attracting, developing, and engaging Union Pacific's talented, diverse workforce while promoting an inclusive workplace where all employees can do their best. We have Aimée-Josiane, who is a Black Organizing Director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, leading NDWA's We Dream in Black program, which builds the power and leadership of Black home care workers, nannies, house cleaners, and unpaid family caregivers. And Dr. Afiya Mbilishaka, who is the owner of Mayat Psychological Services. She is also an assistant professor of psychology and the chair of the psychology chair at the University of the District of Columbia. And she is also responsible for the development of psychotherapy, using beauty salons and barbershops as entry points to mental health care. That's brilliant. And she's an advocate for the Crown Act. So welcome to each of you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with me. And what I'd like to do, with your permission, is to delve immediately into our discussion. You know, so much has changed since our first encounter with COVID-19, and that is especially true of the workplace. So, Jocelyn, I'm directing this at you, but if anyone wants to participate in the answer to this question or this discussion, please feel free to just jump in. I'm hoping that you can share a little bit about the way that this moment has been especially challenging for women of color.
Well, thank you, Congresswoman Watson Coleman, for the question and for convening us and your leadership on just a range of issues affecting Black women and girls. And, you know, your question is so appropriate for this moment, but because what we know about the pandemic is that it has disproportionately impacted women of color, and particularly Black women, in a number of ways. And I often say that women of color have really been on the front lines of the pandemic because they've experienced it on both ends. On the one hand, they continue to work. They are disproportionately essential workers. Many of the folks who we depend on, the cashiers in grocery stores, the healthcare workers, those folks are disproportionately women of color. Many of them are low paid. Many of them do not have access to the protections, the workplace protections that we think are critical, like paid leave, paid sick leave. And so many have been struggling during a pandemic that puts not only their health at risk, but their families as well. At the same time, the other thing that's happening on the other side of the pandemic is the enormous job loss. And what we know is that women of color and women generally are disproportionately represented in many of the industries that have been most hard hit: leisure and hospitality, hotels, restaurants, even some smaller healthcare facilities. All of those places, education, have seen enormous job loss. We have seen women generally lose 2.3 million jobs, and a disproportionate share of that is for women of color. If you look specifically at Black women, nearly a quarter of the jobs lost between February 2020 and February 2021 belong to Black women. So we know that many of them are struggling with the economic insecurity that comes with job loss. And the last component that, again, has been a feature of this pandemic from the beginning is just the disproportionate amount of caregiving that women do generally, and women of color do specifically. Women of color are breadwinners in their families. They are relied upon to provide economic security, but the caregiving needs of their families, particularly now children who are home and virtual schooling, has been enormous for many women of color. So all of these factors together have really an incredible impact on women of color. It's caused economic stress, and it has resulted in disproportionate rates of high unemployment. Black women's unemployment as of last month was highest among all women at 8.9%. Latinas and Asian American women also have higher rates than white women. So we are seeing just the incredible economic impact and a slow recovery for those women, and they're all of great concern.
And haven't the school closures sort of exasperated the situation even more? Women who are both the head earning person in the family and the mother in the family, it's almost a double whammy. This gap has manifested in so many different ways, as you mentioned, and I kind of wanted to ask the psychologist on board here about that, because I know that this has created tremendous anxiety and insecurities and and fears, not only in the mother, not only in that woman, but even in the children. And I'm wondering what you are seeing in that space.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me into this conversation. This is such a meaningful topic, thinking about the lives of Black women and girls, and to think about the stress that I have been observing in my clients and in my students. This is an extremely stressful period. And as you can imagine, stress can trickle throughout the family. So the mental health and wellness of a mother can certainly impact all of her children, her partners, her extended family. So I've definitely been noticing that the responsibilities that come with being a Black woman have been exacerbated, whether it's education or working from home and these different things. So yeah, overall, I'm seeing really high rates of anxiety and mood concerns like depression, just in terms of being able to manage all of the changes that are happening in the world and the pressures, and not necessarily having the systems in place that can support the lives of Black women.
Doctor, that's just with the women who have access to healthcare. Just think about all of those who are in this situation right now, that even MA represents, and even Amy represents. I mean, what about those women? What is happening with them? what are they experiencing, particularly those who work in industries of taking care of people, nannies, women, that sort of frontline area that we don't pay well, we don't have benefits for. What's happening with those women and working in that space? And I want to direct that to you, Aimée.
Yes, excellent question. And thank you again for this really important conversation. And, to echo a bit of what the other panelists have just shared, the emotional toll that domestic workers experienced over the past year is something that we are always grappling with in our work. Because there are about 2.5 million domestic workers who work inside of homes and home-like spaces. And so most of them are nannies and housekeepers and caregivers, and a lot of them are Black, brown, immigrant, and women. So the pandemic only highlighted what we already knew, that care work, the act of caregiving, which is racialized and gendered, is both essential to the economy and severely underpaid and undervalued. And so almost overnight, a significant portion of our members and domestic workers across the countries lost their jobs. They were amongst the first to lose income and the last to receive relief. And so, especially for immigrant women, and I myself am a Black immigrant, that exclusion can be twofold, right? Since their families may often be excluded from the economic relief that has come down the pipeline, and because the threats against Black and brown immigrants during the pandemic never ceased. And so we see compounding crises affecting people, and that has a significant economic toll. A lot of people are facing housing crisis, on top of other economic crises that they may be experiencing in their households due to already extremely low wages in the domestic work industries. And then on top of that, there's the emotional toll. And something that people don't think about is, the nannies and the caregivers who are doing work that is intimate. It's intimate and emotional labor. There is something that happens to you when overnight you can no longer see the person that you've cared for the past several years, because they're experiencing economic impact, and that means that they're not able to pay you, or for safety reasons, they're not able to invite you back into their home for that caregiving work. And then also we, in the past year, surveyed a lot of our members. We surveyed over 800 Black immigrant domestic workers last year. And what we found is that 51% of them had no access to health insurance whatsoever. And that includes employer-paid health services, but also health insurance that they might get from their state or from their municipal government. So the situation is dire, and if nothing else, the pandemic has really highlighted what we knew about the storm that Black women especially are weathering.
We do understand this. We do recognize it. We even speak to it. The COVID bill, the most recent one that was, just signed into law, was designed to make sure that the majority of the resources went to those in greatest need. But it was in some instances it lasts a couple of months. In another instance, it is a one-shot deal. What is it that we should really be thinking about? And I want to direct this right back at you, Aimée, because you're right. You represent essential workers who weren't given the kind of protection, PPE, workers who lost their jobs because their employers couldn't even hire them, or workers that found themselves having to be home because they had children too and had no benefits. What are some of the things that we should be looking to do as we roll out the next relief package? Because most assuredly, we're going to have to do that. One of the things that I thought is really important is that direct stimulus check should have been monthly until we get through this pandemic, you know? And I'm a proponent of things like universal basic income, guaranteed jobs, and of course, $15 minimum wage. What are the kinds of things that you think we should be looking at, specifically addressing those workers that work in that space that's so vital to our well-being, but has been so undervalued?
That's an excellent question. Because what we're looking for recovery, not just from the losses that we experienced during the pandemic and this economic crisis, but we're really for domestic work, we are trying to undo an extremely long legacy of undervaluing Black women's labor. And so even before the pandemic, the median hourly wage for Black domestic workers was about $12 an hour, and in most cases a lot lower because of the lack of regulation in our industries that makes wage theft really, really rampant and hard to enforce. And so what we need right now, there's a real opportunity to win stronger labor laws, a full suite of protections for domestic workers and other excluded workers across the country. But we also need a major public investment, and like you mentioned, right now, as we're talking about, relief and recovery, we have to make sure that Black, brown, and the major investments that are going to be going into, recovery should be going into jobs, right? Women of color, Black women and immigrants lost over 5 million jobs last year. So we have to make sure that the investments, when we talk about economic recovery in this country, we're talking about actually creating those good jobs that are going to support Black women so that they can then support their own families. And the last thing I'll say is that, with investment in creating good jobs that, of course, have to pay at least $15 an hour, we also want to make sure that there's an investment in much needed professional development. Because what we see right now, particularly in the home healthcare industry, which is, growing and projected to be one of the fastest growing industries, and where Black women, make up about a third of the workers, we're also seeing that Black women are being priced out of professionalization opportunities. And so with investment in good jobs, we want to make sure that we're also investing in workforce development, professional development, so that Black women and girls can actually attain higher paying jobs that come with benefits that other industries enjoy. So I would say the future of Black women's work is really going to depend on how we approach this moment. And to approach it responsibly, I think, would be to ensure that when we talk about recovery for this economy, we're talking about jobs recovery for Black women who are, for the most part, breadwinners, right? They're heads of households, and it's really important that we're able to do better than $12 an hour.
Thank you. Yeah, we're talking about women sort of in the workspace from the C-suites all the way down to our lowest paid workers. And even in those situations, there's always a pay gap. There's a disparity. There's a difficulty in getting there and in sustaining there. And Aimée, you're working in like a very interesting space, because you work with United Pacific, right?
With Union Pacific.
Union Pacific, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And you are working with a manufacturing institute on a program that seeks to bring presumably more African Americans, more black. I think that's a broader term that we should be using more. Women into the under first of all, tell us a little bit about the kinds of jobs and the pay areas. But how is this program working? How are you finding success?
Yeah, thank you so
It's a
much for having me here today. So I would love to talk to you about that partnership. It's something that we just started this year. We're always seeking more diverse workforce as we build America. We have a unique opportunity to address some of today's workforce crisis head on. And our goal at Union Pacific is to double our number of women in the workplace in the next 10 years. And so to achieve that goal, we're working with the Manufacturing Institute, and our initiative is called Careers on Track. As you said, we're aspiring to bring in more women of color, to pursue jobs in our industry. It's a $3 million grant that we're providing over 3 years. And some of the initiatives, it's a new digital STEM curriculum, virtual STEM experience. This is where participants can choose their own adventures, exploring 3D models of real facilities of our locomotives and more. A STEM micro grant program for young people, especially our young Black girls, to be a part of. A digital campaign showcasing industry career opportunities for underserved women in some select regions. So when you're looking at this manufacturing industry, there's over 500,000 job openings right now. And we anticipate there's going to be millions more of jobs over the next decade. So closing that gender gap is going to be critical in meeting those needs. So our Career on Track, we hope will serve as a national model on how to empower and inspire women and youth, particularly girls of color, to explore career paths, and also changing the perception of the industry. This railroad, we've been around, the railroad industry has been around for longer than 160 years. UP is at 158 years. And sometimes the perception is that our technology is old, but we have, very high tech technology, and our jobs run anything you'd want to be. You could, there's a job here at Union Pacific that would probably cover that. So we hope to really use this initiative to, provide a pathway, and just introduce what these jobs and what these careers could be. And, starting very young, so our young Black girls get interested in math and science and engineering, so that when it comes time to pursue jobs, they're going to be in the best position to be qualified for this job. So we're inspired by the Manufacturing Institute's track record of innovation, and we're really looking forward to working with them closely over the next 3 years. And this is an investment in our future and in the future of our Black community and our young Black girls and women.
Are you exposing young students in high school?
Yeah, actually high school and middle school. Some of the things I've seen, I'm like, I would like to go back and do some of the stuff with the 3D mapping. It looks like so much fun and so interesting. And so it's really just generating a lot of excitement and energy, and just to let people know what these careers and what these fields can really bring. I think it's just opening people's eyes to that, and knowing in the end, these are going to be some really good paying jobs, not just jobs, but careers.
I'm on an appropriations subcommittee in the whole manufacturing field. Everyone keeps talking in the technology field. We've got thousands of jobs available. We're going to have hundreds of thousands of jobs available. There are jobs available now, and I'm thinking, well, then why are we so underemployed?
Yeah.
So what is it that we need to be thinking about and concentrating on to make educational opportunities for repurposing for women who didn't go to college, aren't going to go to college, don't have to go to college to earn a good living. How do we get to them? How do we let them know that there are other opportunities out here for them? And I love the idea that you're in high schools, because, and I've talked to unions about this even when I was a state legislator. You say a person has to pass a math test in order to get into your union. Well, do you ever go into the high schools and in the middle schools and tell them how that math course that they take today can help them to earn $150,000 a year as an electrician or a carpenter or whatever? We need to do more of that. And so, are you working, Amy, just in a particular region of the country? If so, where?
So we operate in 23 different states. And those are the northern, northwestern. We're in, from Washington to California to Texas and in the Midwest. So those are the states that where we operate in and where we're focused in. And besides these programs, we have a lot of other programs that we're working on. We have scholarships for trade schools. We always talk about the 4-year colleges, but we also offer scholarships for trade schools. You don't have to have a degree for some of these careers that are still going to pay you really, really well. So we look into that and sponsoring women and Black women in those trade opportunities. And then one of the things too we focus on is we make these investments, and then we want to make sure that people want to stay in these positions. So we do a lot of surveys, and we have women in operating task force. And if you're a woman and you're working on the railroad on a train and you decide that you are going to have children, and how do you manage that? And we have milk storks where if you are breastfeeding, that you can ship your milk home. We have lactation rooms and different things to try to make sure that when women come to our company, that they're made to feel welcome and included. So those are some of the different things that we're doing.
So you're working with the Manufacturing Institute. Is that a nationwide institute? Are you hooking up with people who are on the East Coast in the in the central part of the country? I'm trying to figure out, there are pockets where there's some really exciting things going on. And then there are other areas where it doesn't seem like as much knowledge or opportunity. I'm trying to figure out what are the gaps here, and what is it that we should be trying to accomplish to give women an opportunity to see these sort of non-traditional opportunities to work in. So if anyone wants to comment on that, Jocelyn, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think the challenge is we have to expose women to all the different opportunities out there, and deal with, sort of the reality of where women are, but also expose them to the opportunities of where they could go. And it sounds like this institute is one strategy for that. We share those best practices and ensure that women across the country have access to those opportunities, because it's critical. What we know is that Black women in particular are disproportionately working in lower wage jobs. And we also know, as you pointed out earlier, that regardless of where they're working, they are often undervalued in those jobs. They experience pay gaps at all levels. So I think it's in the interest of Black women to do whatever we can to expose them to those opportunities. But we also need to make sure that regardless of where they're working, that they continue to be paid fairly, that they continue to be treated fairly, and that, whatever that environment, that they have, a high quality job, they have the labor protections that they need. All of those things are really critically important.
Thank you. What do you all think about things that Congress could do to expose women across the nation to these opportunities, number one? What are the kinds of programs or grants or initiatives that we should be advancing that will give women the opportunity? And I've got something, put a pin in that because I want you to answer that. And Amy, I want you know, a lot of the people that your interest that you advocate for, we need. So we can't afford to train everybody to do something other than what they're doing in the workspace that you support and advocate for. So need to know specifically what we need to be doing in that workspace as well. So anyone would take a shot at either one of those is fine with me. What should we be doing nationally? And Amy, I'm sorry, I am terrible with this, and I apologize with all due respect. What is it that we should be doing, particularly in the workspace that you cover?
Yes, thank you. So there are a couple of things right now that that we're doing and that we're hoping to win and fight for. You know, on the Hill and in all the states where our members are struggling to transform this industry. So one thing is we have been fighting for a domestic worker bill of rights, and we want to make you know, domestic workers' rights the law of the land. You know, in some states that have more. Some states have achieved, you know, progressive laws that support domestic workers in New York and California. But for states like Georgia, where I live, domestic workers aren't currently included in some of the state laws, something as simple as rights to a minimum wage. And so at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we've been thinking about, you know, how do we address this on a national level? And a federal bill of rights that would give domestic workers all the rights that they're currently cut out of, and add additional rights that, you know, really speak to the nature of the work today, right? Such as privacy, you know, something that people don't think about. Domestic workers often have to think about, are they being recorded in their workplace because it's somebody's private home? So there's so many additional issues on top of the extremely low wages that we want to address. And so we think that something, some wide-ranging legislation like a federal Bill of Rights would really help that. And then again, you know, I mentioned earlier about this moment that we're in, and we're all looking forward at the next, you know, economic recovery package, and we want to make sure that that package includes and does not forget domestic workers. You know, the caregivers, the nannies, the housekeepers who are essential. But what we found out is that essential also often means underpaid, right? On the front lines often means underpaid and undervalued. So this is a real moment right now. I think, you know, to the Congresswoman and to all of your peers in Congress, we need you to remember domestic workers when you're coming up with the next recovery package, and making sure that we're investing in the systems that pay domestic workers, systems like Medicaid, our childcare infrastructure. All of those things have to be supported, and they don't just support the, you know, Black women who are working in these fields. They also support the Black women who are home right now because they can't afford childcare, or they can't afford family care for people in their household, and so they're missing out on participating in the labor force themselves. I'm really hoping that rises to the top, and we're also pushing to ensure that immigrant workers are not forgotten. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but, you know, immigrant domestic workers are facing not just the economic realities of this crisis, but we're also thinking about what does it mean to come out of 4 years of intense attacks on you know, protected statuses for immigrants, and so what comes next? And we want to make sure that, the administration and all of our elected leaders are thinking about that, thinking about how do we ensure that the workers who have been so essential and on the front lines and our immigrants have a pathway to citizenship as we move forward, because that's also going to be very important if we're going to actually retain the extremely qualified and dedicated women that are taking care of our country right now.
I tell you, the House of Representatives is taking up a bill on pathway to citizenship and protection status for people coming from certain countries. We're just going to pray that the Senate finds the conscience and will to do the same thing. So we have 1, 2, 3, we're 5 of us on here, and each of us has a different hairstyle. And our hairstyle is, an expression of who we are at that moment. I remember in my younger years when I was working full-time in the executive branch, I worked for someone who had never had an African-American or Black woman working that closely to him. And I would have long hair one year, and then next year I'd have short hair. I'd have blonde hair, red hair, whatever I felt like doing. And he said to me one time, I just never know what to expect from you when you come in because you change your hair so much. And I said, you're looking at my hair, but my performance never changes. And so I think that, we've hit that moment now where Black women in particular are even more expressive. And it's not just coloring your hair or wearing it short or wearing it long. It's about, doing something exciting and different and, sort of an even ethnic statement, whatever you want to call it, but it's all right. And so I am proud to be the sponsor of the Crown Act now, with Cedric having gone on to the White House to advise the president. And I know that Dr. A, that you are very much an advocate for the Crown Act. Let's talk a little bit about how people perceive us and how we hope that the consideration, passing, and signing on the Crown Act, what it will do for women particularly, but for men also, actually, in the workspace. And what is it going to take to educate and enforce?
Okay. Yeah, so you're going to get me very excited talking about hair. I love talking about hair. So even though I got my PhD in clinical psychology, afterwards, I actually went to hair school because I felt like the conversations that were happening in hair salons and barbershops were critical for Black communities. So I felt like that was a more authentic way to engage. And so even thinking about the role of hair in terms of the workplace and perceptions, we really even need to start with educational experiences. So every day across this country, Black people have to navigate institutions that meet their presence with policies that actually police their hair. So for example, twins, Deanna and Maya Scott in Massachusetts had detention for wearing box braids or promisayers. A 10-year-old in Nashville went viral for wearing an afro to school despite being bullied. Or Marion Scott, she was actually denied her school photo at 8 years old because she had the color red in her extensions. And of course, all of us know the New Jersey resident, Andrew Johnson, who was publicly shamed for wearing locks during his school wrestling match, where the referees actually butchered his hair in order to compete in a competition that he did win. So these trending examples of customary and discriminatory practices actually target Black people at school and at work through their hair and basically demonstrate how policies manifest as active forms of oppression, surveillance, othering, and marginalization. So clearly, Black hairstyles, textures, lengths are sites of political struggle, positioning psycho-emotional demands on Black people to not only anticipate, but diagnose, critique, and hopefully dismiss attacks on their aesthetics. As all of us know on this chat right now, Black hair care techniques are very intricate and psychologically meaningful for our culture. And so across the African continent, oftentimes we would have these rich rituals connected to our hair, and there's almost a language system, right, that we have with our hair in terms of expressing different parts of our identity. But in terms of enslavement in this country, our crowns were desecrated, being labeled as fur or wool. And even laws in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century were focused on policing Black hair, like the Tignon laws of Louisiana, or even the 2015 laws for the military about dress codes. And so I just really want to make sure that we understand that there's a hyper surveillance of Black hair. So in a recent study with Dove, they were finding that Black women, 80% of Black women said that they felt like they were being discriminated against based on their hair at work, right? In terms of feeling the need to go home or even change their hair. And so that's way higher than any other group having to monitor how their hair looks at work or at school. So you just got me excited. I just started talking a whole bunch about hair, but to recognize that it really shapes our access, and it really shapes our mental health, right? In terms of how we feel about how we look and how other people evaluate our aesthetics, impacts our sense of identity. So I'm so happy that the Crown Act, for example, has been coming out, which is specifically creating a respectful and open world for natural hair in particular, such as Bantu knots, braids, locks, afros, twists, curly hair like mine. So I just got too excited, but yeah, I could go on for about 3 hours on this. So I'll stop now, but I don't even know if I answered the question, but I just got excited.
Listen, I appreciate your excitement about this issue, because I think that recognizing the sort of the creative expressiveness that we manifest in the way we wear our hair is also a kind of a learning lesson for other people to appreciate our differences and see the beauty in our difference, as opposed to the otherness of our difference. And I know that, you know, in school in particular, young non-minority girls can come in with purple hair, blue hair, or whatever, and it's just seen as an expression of creativity and not a threat in any way. So unlike what's happening with our community, how this is just perceived as some sort of a threat to status quo or a threat to your security or safety. I think it's very important that we have this discussion about this. And I think it's very exciting that you actually went into the barbershops and the hair salons to sort of see this, observe this, and have discussion about this. My chief of staff believes that the barbershop is like the best place to find out what's happening politically in the community. So your work is very inspiring to me, and your advocacy for this is very exciting. And I look forward to working with you on this even more. And I don't know if anyone else has an expression to share with regard to this particular issue. If you do, please just jump in.
Well,
Jocelyn?
I will jump in just to piggyback on those comments, because I think, you know, what's important to remember is that, at least in the context of the workplace, the way that you are supposed to be measured and evaluated is on the quality of the work you do. It's not supposed to be on things related to your hair or, you know, other things that really have nothing to do with your professionalism or your capabilities or your skills or just the quality of your work. And, I think it is a reminder that, for too many Black women, first and foremost, when they walk into the doors of their workplace, they are walking through the intersection of race and gender. And that in and of itself carries with it a whole set of perceptions about them that may have nothing to do with their capabilities and their capacity to do the work. And it's incumbent upon us to make sure that those women have the protections that they need to make sure that they are being treated fairly like other workers. It's not simply that, their hair looks different. It's that they're being held to a different standard because, as you point out, the white women who are, their counterparts or men are not being held to those same sorts of standards. That's what we should expect in the workplace. We should expect equity for all people. And we certainly shouldn't expect Black women to be held to a different standard that is largely informed by perceptions and stereotypes rather than the actual quality of the work they perform.
Absolutely. And if we were, if we were talking about, the sort of other experiences that young Black women, young Black girls in particular experience, it isn't even just their hair, it's the way that they're dressed and the perception of their being more adult-like than they actually are. And I think we're at a moment in this country where people are more open to hearing because they're seeing more. I mean, we're seeing what's happening now to our Asian population as a result of the 4 years of the former administration. It's just awful. But at least people are seeing it. You can't deny that it's happening. When we saw what was happening with police abuse of Black men and Black women, you can't deny it because you saw it. And so we're at that point right now where I think we are holding people accountable, our sort of allies. Don't tell us how sorry you are. Don't tell us how you agree with us, but stand up with us. I didn't even understand this notion of allyship until I had a panel discussion with a diverse group of lawyers. And I'm like, so here's a new word that's coined, a special kind of friendship that's grounded in having an appreciation of our difference. Well, what does that mean? It means nothing if you don't stand it up with some action. And so I don't know if if Amy or Jocelyn or Aimée-Josiane have any comment with regard to that.
Yeah, sure. And again, I just want to, thank Dr. A for your enthusiasm around the Crown Act. Before I give my thoughts on allyship, I want to share that when I was, I think, 18 or 19, I filed my first claim to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, because I was the only Black person at my small retail company. And I was asked by my boss and by his assistant to change my hair to look more like his assistant's hair, who is a white woman, just had pulled back hair in a bun. And so I wish that there was a Crown Act back then, because I did file my claim, but then I left the job. It was too much. It was too much. And walking in every day knowing that the sight of me was triggering conversations up top was too much. And so I think that this is, in many ways, it's a life-saving thing, because it's going to prevent people from leaving where places where we deserve to be. So on the topic of allyship, I actually prefer to use the term accomplice, because I think that, Black women have been resisting, right, since from the first Black feet that touched the shores of this continent. Black people have been fleeing and resisting the racial and gendered capitalism that still plagues us. And so I think that the best thing that anyone who claims to support and to be an allyship or to be an accomplice of Black women is to follow our leadership, and to be okay with stepping back. For us at the National Domestic Workers Alliance, we launched an unbossed agenda that was named after Shirley Chisholm, and just, her fire and her lack of shame in championing, the rights and the freedoms of Black women. And so we ask our supporters who are not Black to follow our lead, read our unbossed agenda, take your instructions from Black women, because we've been resisting and we know what it takes to actually fundamentally shift how labor and care is looked at in this country. And so that's what I would say. I would say being an accomplice is a step higher than an ally, because you have to be active. You have to be active, and you have to be willing to take your direction from the people who know best, which is Black women in this case.
Well, we saw what Black women have been doing over the last year, filling in spaces that were where there were big gaps, and helping to reshape, I think, our country. Having conversations like this are exactly what this caucus on Black women and girls was formed to elevate issues and to look at potential legislation, from the woman in the workspace to protecting the young Black girl in school who's overly disciplined and not given the same opportunities, not picked for the same things. We feel a strong sense of protection. And so having conversations with women like you helps us to advance our agenda and to put the issues out there more, and to look at the kind of work that we need to do to follow up on the things that you suggested. So I would like very much to give you an opportunity to make whatever closing statements, admonitions, expectations you'd like to make as we close out our panel discussion. And I'm going to go this way. I'm going to go to Ms. Bang, Ms. Frye, Dr. A, and Aimée-Josiane. So on you, Amy.
Just thank you again for having me. This has been a great discussion. I know, talking about the Crown Act, I just want to revisit that just for a second. We have been having some very open discussions with our senior leadership and the entire company. And we talk about bringing your whole self to work. We talk about, recruiting diversity, and it's one thing having diversity, it's a whole nother thing for people to feel that they're included. So part of that is, if you want to wear your hair a certain way, then you can do that. And we are going to make sure that that's not a barrier for you, that's a really a non-issue. So I think, as you mentioned, having that dialogue, that open dialogue. So, the new employee that comes in and sees the employee that, has been here for 20 years and is wearing her hair how she wants, it gives them the freedom to do that too. It also lets people address their own unconscious bias about that, so that they can start working on, is that something that I'm thinking about when I'm looking to promote somebody, because I shouldn't be. So I really am so glad that we're having these discussions. And then I just want to talk a little bit about allyship. What we're doing here at Union Pacific, we have employee resource groups where anybody can be involved, and we encourage people with outside of those groups to join, because we realize in order to have that inclusive environment, that we need to have our allies. We need to have the people who are going to stand up when something's said that's not right, right and stand with us. We need that confidence sometimes where things happen, and you just need somebody to believe you. Sometimes there's some crazy stories that happen when it comes to comments that Black women will face, and sometimes you just want somebody that is going to believe you and be supportive of you. So I think that's part of the allyship. I will say, I really want people to, think about the railroad for a career. These are really good paying jobs. These are jobs that are going to start generational wealth in families. They provide benefits, railroad retirement, and they're just not careers that people always tend to look at for the railroad. But there are so many opportunities for women, for Black women, and just to have the opportunities to come in and really make a good living and be part of what we think is a really great company. We are focusing on. We're pretty proud of our. We look at our pay disparity. We look at that all the time, and I'm very confident that if I'm working the same job as a white male, that my pay is going to be the same because we look at that so closely. But what we're focusing on is that next level. While we may be receiving the same pay, how do we promote Black women so that they're advancing into those higher level, higher paying jobs? And that's a part of making sure that we have diverse panels, which is a requirement. We have to have a female, we have to have a person of color on these panels to make sure we talk about unconscious bias, but it's also making sure that we're putting people in positions so that they are successful. And we have leadership development, we have sponsorships, we have emerging leaders. So that's really going to be how we address a long-term gender gap for Black women in this country. So thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it and really enjoyed hearing everybody else too speak.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. And actually, you kind of like piqued our interest in a whole new job realm. Never really thought about working on the railroad, or more like working for the railroad. Thank you. Thank you, Amy. Ms. Frye.
Thank you, Congresswoman Watson Coleman, again for convening us. And I think in just terms of final remarks, I would say just a couple of quick things. One is that I think, what this conversation reminds us of is that it's so important to really center Black women and women of color more broadly in the policy discourse. That it is often, when you look at the experiences of Black women, you see the many different types of barriers that are impacting our workplaces, that it's not just about gender, it's also about race and a whole host of other factors, stereotypes, prejudices that can be barriers to their opportunities and barriers to their success. And so if we focus in on those experiences, then we actually can figure out where do we need to drive change. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I want to go back to something that you said at the very beginning, which is that, the pandemic is a reminder of the problems that we have failed to address. It is, I think, inaccurate to look at the pandemic as creating new problems. What the pandemic has done is really exacerbated old problems that we didn't have the political will to at all. Things like paid family leave or raising the minimum wage. These are just things that we should have done because they're basic labor standards. They're basic ways of just raising the job quality of workplaces for all workers. And so the one thing that we should do as we look towards a recovery from the pandemic is really fix problems that should have been fixed a long time ago. And that will help Black women, but it really will help all workers. And the last thing I would say is that, particularly with the theme of allyship, I think we have to keep remembering that we are operating in systems that are often inherently flawed, inherently biased, and we're not built by us nor for us. And so we come into workplaces and institutions in places where there is already a built-in inequity. And it is important for allies who, even when they want to be helpful and they want to speak up, that they also own the fact that they are operating in a system that may privilege them, that they benefit from uniquely because of their status and their positioning, their race, their gender, and so forth. And part of allyship may be giving up that privilege, giving up that benefit, reconfiguring the power balance within an entity or an organization to create a system that actually works for everybody. The need to drive systemic change is fundamental to improving the opportunities for Black women, but really all people. So I think it's important for us to continue to think about how do we drive systemic change so that we're not always sort of tinkering around the edges. And with that, I'll hand it over to other people.
That's a very deep discussion about leveling.
Very true.
Yeah. Aimée? Jocelyn? Closing remarks?
Sure. I'll make mine really brief, just to echo what others have shared about the moment that we're in. I really truly believe that this is a moment that we can solve for Black domestic workers, and if we do that, we will solve this crisis for all Black women and for all working people. And so that's what I'm looking at. And I think when you solve things for the most disenfranchised workers, it lifts everybody up. And again, I'm really, really grateful to be part of this powerful conversation. Thank you again, Congresswoman Watson-Coleman, for this invitation.
Glad to have you. Thank you so much for your contribution here. And Dr. A.
Yes. Yes, I have so much gratitude for everyone in this conversation, and really thinking about how we can transform lives. I think a critical piece is that we really need to understand our own stories, our own life stories that have led us to this point, and the need for social justice, but also to study the stories that empower Black women, like the stories of Madam C.J. Walker, or my new obsession is the life story of Harriet Tubman. People don't know the truth about her, but I feel like she's such a great example to study, to negotiate this liberation work, to understand women and strength and beauty and fighting and working really hard, and just to recognize that there are systems across history that are oppressing Black women due to sexism and racism, and the process of healing really needs to take those systems down. So that's just my reflection on the systemic level of this work and the personal aspects too.
Well, I want to thank each and every one of you because this has really been a very rich discussion from my perspective, and it has led me to think of some things that we need to be discussing in my office. Each of you brought your own special brand of information and helpfulness and intellect to this discussion. And this is exactly what the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls wants to do. So I am so very grateful to all of you. I'm sure we will be calling on you again. By the next time, I should feel comfortable in saying your whole name. But God bless you. God bless the work that you do. And thank you for spending this time with me.